And welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific, brought to you by our producer, IEJ Media, and by our sponsor, Power Group Asia. We will tell you all about them in due course. I am the former military officer, Ray Powell, coming to you from California. My co-host, Jim Carouso, is not right now here. Now, he may join us later, depending on how his day goes, but for now, I am flying solo. And I am pleased to be joined by Timothy Cho. Timothy Cho has an extremely interesting life story. He survived 4 imprisonments, I believe, in North Korea and China before finally escaping North Korea and resettling to the United Kingdom, where he now serves with the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on North Korea and speaks globally on political persecution. Now, Timothy, we have so much to talk about, but let's start with our standard intro question. Why should we care what it's really like to live in North Korea?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. But first thing comes to my mind is that this is great that you are based in California and I am in Manchester in the UK. But we are able to do this podcast interview, which is great. But imagine if I was in North Korea, we couldn't have expected this opportunity. And I often say this, and I just returned from an UK Conservative Party conference where I was attending there as a party member and also candidate. But there was a session and concerning what's happening in Afghanistan. And there were a couple of panel speakers, Afghanistan human rights activists who were speaking there. And two of them actually mentioned this. They recently had an experience of 2 days internet cutoff between inside Afghanistan society and outside. And everyone was panicking. They didn't know how to communicate between families and also and the humanitarian aid, how this equipment could be provided, get into Afghanistan. So there were a number of issues how you could tell how much concern and panicking they had that moment of 48 hours internet cutoff. All my mind was that moment, wow, North Korea, where I was born, and I escaped a while ago, but this country still doesn't have internet, social media, or mobile phones, where between families, even myself and my relatives, still there cannot have a phone call or any Zoom access. That internet access is completely blockaded. This is what links to your first question. Why should we care about North Korea and 25 million inside? This is the only country. And when you look at it on the religious report, human rights report, humanitarian issues, whatever category of we collect all report, the country who is on the top is North Korea. Even Yemen, Iran, Eritrea, those who escape from these countries, at least they still have a passport, or even they can communicate with their families. Of course, the regime side, they are monitoring and watching them. But still there is a minor opportunity to see them on the screen. It is the only country, North Korea, blockaded, as you can see, through Google satellite, but the country itself, completely between inside and outside, information is blockaded.
Mm. Well, so tell us a little more about what your life was like there, and specifically, what drove you to the point where you realized that you needed to leave and try to get out?
Hmm. But this morning I emailed to someone and I said to the lady who I emailed to, human rights activism requires great perseverance. And at the same time, it is still a great privilege that I can do this because I survived. So your question to what my life was back to North Korea, and I survived, and I did survive. But it was if when I was born, did I know what kind of journey I was facing through, and eventually I ended up in the United Kingdom and the work what I am doing, and of course I raise my voice against this regime on behalf of these many millions of people who cannot speak. But the fact was that all these 17 years I lived inside North Korea, I did not know I was worshipping the Kim family. We were not just about survive, but the process of from the day you were born, you are subjected to think, speak, act, and sing for the Kim family as the regime dictated. And but not hold aside these countries about dictators, but there are also millions of ordinary people. Like when I was, while you don't understand, you didn't realize what you were doing on a daily basis, your life is submitted to the Kim family while you couldn't see anything what was going on outside. But at the same time, still there are men and women and families, friends and schools, and this social infrastructure exists in this country. My both parents were high school teachers, and teachers in North Korea are very important because they produce and reproduce of the brainwashed education of young people who have to submit, give loyalty and love and devotions to the Kim family. But my so we were very respected family. I was born, and often my parents' students come play with me, look after me. It was the probably the most happy time I had until the moment when my parents first escaped. And until then, you go to school or even nursery, and you spend time friends with and playing outside, and come home watching cartoon, which I remember. But even those some of cartoons are still subjective, how they and twisted history of that cartoon, such as even let's say religious persecution stories, even in primary school textbook, how they portrayed and what the Christian missionary did bad things to North Korean young children, and this kind of brainwashing education actually we were eating it on a daily basis from the day we were born.
So that's really interesting, Timothy, and it kind of brings me to the question. I want to get to the question of your escape, and actually, you talked about your parents' escape. I think that's also an interesting topic. But we've all seen, the pictures of the crowds that are assembled around Kim Jong Un or Kim Jong Il or Kim Il Sung, through the years. And when we watch them as outsiders, we see sort of these people who almost look like caricatures, jumping up and down and clapping and yelling, and we think to ourselves, are they terrified? Are they enthusiastic? Are they faking? What are they actually thinking? Is it that they have been brainwashed to the point where they really feel excited, or are they just doing what they're told with as much enthusiasm as they think they have to?
Mm. Well, I could say it all could be combined of. Some may still have still the perception of from brainwashed education from very young age, or in the society of it is coerced. They are forcing them to love the leader, and if you don't show the love, loyalty, devotion to the Kim family, it is being society watched constantly from one another. So you are subjected to do so. So what you just described all could be combined of the atmosphere within people and public, and they either they have to do it or they are subjected to do this. And let me just go back to this side then. When Kim died, I was 7. I was around 7 actually. I genuinely was very sad. I still remember it. My
Mhm.
daughter is now 7-year-old, and I read her story every night, and she loves it. And from time to time, she raises questions. I can see from her age why I still remember the moment when the first Kim died. And I came home in full of tears and asked my father, Father, our God died now. I genuinely believed he was like my grandfather and God. And what are we going to do? Are we all going to die?
Mm.
Literally, I didn't eat and sleep well for a few days. And one day I even skipped to go to school, went to mountain to collect wild flowers, tried to keep my love, the how I could express my loyalty, bring these flowers to Kim family statue. So that
Wow.
was the least thing I thought. I went and walked around the mountain for 3-4 hours, but I was only able to find one piece of flower because so many people were looking for try to collect wild flowers. There were not even flowers left around the mountains and fields, and price even went up. But my father told me, "Wow, it's still." I never forget what he said at that moment. Son, he's not died, and he still lives in our heart eternally, and he's not died, so he's an eternal leader. And we are now following his son of God.
Well,
So the context here.
that's remarkable. And so I guess what that brings us to is, so your father, who told you these things about Kim Il Sung and that he's with you forever and all of these things, eventually your father and your mother felt like they had to flee North Korea. So either at that time he was telling you what he thought he had to tell you, maybe there was some doubt in his mind already, but eventually he got to this point. How old were you when your parents escaped? And then how did that affect your life going forward? forward?
So I was about turning into age 10, and I think my father definitely had his conscience that was wrestling against himself, because you keep have to tell students and twisted history. Let's say one and very a great example is that the Korean War. We were growing up in North Korea. We thought Korean was divided by U.S. and South Korea. But Korean War in 1950, it was actually invaded by North Korea. But they rephrased this history itself, and so probably that wrestling against his heart, he made that decision. But it was all of a sudden, I just came home and opened the door, and I realized my parents were gone, and you can feel it, the atmosphere of a frozen wind hitting your face. But this was the place where I had my breakfast with my parents, and you didn't expect that they were gone just like that. And this was the way of the process they escaped. Later, of course, I understood if they didn't make that choice, whole family could have been arrested and taken to prison camp. North Korea has the very common thing happen often in North Korea is enforced disappearance. All of a sudden, a car arrives at your home, and they put all family into the car and just driven away. And we know where they ended up, and no one talks about it. And society itself is very tensed, and people know what to speak, what should not speak, what should not even whisper each other around. And it's like, if you live in a place, but the devil is controls everything you, but what devil don't want you to do is that, and isolate you and distract you and confuse you. This is the thing, make you isolation means they don't want to let you have communication with one another, or platform is being created, that atmosphere.
So
This is what North Korean system, it has been there for over 75 years.
so when you came home, and I guess, sorry if you said it, I missed it. How old were you, and what did you think had happened?
And I, c- I couldn't understand exactly, but I knew that my parents were gone. But only I could expect they escaped to another country. But obviously, we know the closest country North Korea has is with China. So, and that was my my thought they escaped, but that's the maximum imagination I could think of. They may escape to China. That's it. And it
And you
was
were how old?
I was turning into age 10,
10.
between 9 and 10, and primary third year of primary school, and it was also the time where mass starvation was happening in North Korea, which within 1990s, over millions of people died of starvation. As we know, all the collapse of these Soviet communist bloc countries, even China couldn't afford feeding its own people, decided economic doors. Vietnam did, but North Korea closed the door, going into isolation itself, and which caused millions of starvation. So my parents was one of the first line of the group who decided to defect to China. I mean, of course, it was due to political persecution, what happened to my father. And but uh, the following story, after my father escaped, was not easy. And I also saw many homeless people who were surviving, sleeping, begging food on the streets, which I had also a couple of years surviving is begging food and sleeping at the stations, in train containers and under bridges. Um, it was hard picture of it. And from time to time, when I go to homeless people in the UK, which I just can't walk past away without asking them if they wanted any hot drink or bacon balm that I could offer them. And but I still say to them, homeless people in the UK, we shouldn't have homeless. The government must try to minimize, but we still see these homeless people. We have church groups, organizations, or individuals who are able to provide with food and shelters. I mean, in North Korea, there was none of these were available, and many kids particularly, and you could easily see they die on the street of starvation or frozen to death, or when you are ill, there are no medications available. And I often wonder if those who I survived with still alive in North Korea.
So Timothy, you then your parents escaped when you were 10. Were you then immediately sort of forced out on your own? There was nobody who came in, nobody from the government, no other family member that took you in?
So firstly, North Korea does have orphanage systems, but it doesn't really work. Even if the authorities come to take you to orphanage, they are not able to provide with food. Often, and a number of, and I heard this story from other kids who went to orphanage. They were just were given food once a day. So eventually they all run away from the orphanage as well. Second thing, of course, you could try to go and live with your relatives and family members. But hunger and starvation, it means families are really struggle to have an extra person to come live with, which I did actually go to my second uncle's house, and I had to get on train, and I didn't have train ticket, and I was holding the on the stair where you walk to get on the train, but I was sitting there and holding the stair for 2.5 hours
Oh,
in the winter, and I arrived at my uncle's house, and and I saw the sweetened bread and soup on dining table. You could see the steam and smell of it. It was so seemed delicious food, and I had the feeling of relief that thinking I was able to eat. But my auntie and uncle did not ask me, as I was sitting there over 45 years, if I were eaten or were hungry. And and I left to my uncle's house in tears, but it was not what it used to be like them. They which I remember every New Year, the family whole, as my father used to have 7 brothers and sisters when family all gathered at grandparents' house. it was the one of the best, and happiest moments. Spend time relatives and cousins, playing around, have lots of delicious food. But this was a different picture. And I went, of course, to the market, and was begging food, and met a guy who was another homeless boy, which then both of us started traveling, and back and forth, cities and towns, villages. Um, the another experience which I had, I also testified this at the United Nations Human Rights Council session on the DPRK, that one day I woke up at the train station, and early in the morning I felt my back was itching very terribly badly. And I asked my friend what was going on my back, and he took off my shirt and saw many bed bugs burrowed under my skin. They need human blood, and it's terrible itching. And I asked him to kill them all, so he used the needle to poke onto each bed bug inside the back of the skin. And once we killed them all, blood was just streaming through on the back. But before I felt that the real pain. I saw two children next to me, and it was brother and sister. They were so little. I mean, my second child is now 3, and often it reflects when I see him that my mind go back to North Korea. But they died next to me of starvation, and brother and sister holding the hand. They look so pale, of course, when they died. Um, and the city council was collecting their body in the morning. But this was what environment I had to confront when I was growing up.
And what sorry, what years were these? Put us in time. Was this
It was between 1995, 1999 were the worst period of the time,
the
which
famine?
were happening significantly across the country. Um, yeah.
So, okay, let's move forward. Eventually, you decided that you too had to escape. And so when you finally made that decision, first, how did you make that decision? Did you have help?
Mm.
And then how did it happen? How did it go?
So I never thought, even though I was going through a lot of hard time in North Korea, struggling growing up and without parents, I never thought I was leaving this country. But two things I experienced. One thing, after my parents escaped, I couldn't go to school. The government told me I was a son of a traitor. This country was built upon communism and socialism, whatever political ideology they described. So they said it was a classless society, everyone is equal. But this country now ended up itself creating its own classification systems. And those defectors' family members and children, like myself, we were categorized enemy class and hostile class. And I was not able to go to school, which means discriminated. And when the, the day I went to school after my parents escaped, I still remember it. Everyone was whispering from behind and next to me, "Oh, his father betrayed his country." It was one of the painful moments hearing it back to school, and I couldn't go back to school from next day. But when I was 17, I was still hoping that I would be able to have my independent life in the society of North Korea. So I want to join the army. So every man from age 17 or 18, you have to join the army in North Korea for 10 years. I mean, you both come from the army background, you may understand well. In North Korea, every man is for 10 years service. And some of them who are in Ukraine today and supporting Putin's illegal war is dreadful. And but when I went to military office, this officer told me, "You cannot join the army. Your father betrayed this country." And I told him, "Well, I will work hard to pay back my father's crime." I didn't even know what my father's crime was exactly. But although I was a fine and healthy young man, they said, "No, you cannot join the army." When I asked them, "So where can I go?" and they told me we would send you to coal mine. North Korea's map is satellite. When you see through Google satellite, it's very darkest country in the world. One of the reasons because they don't have electricity power, but it means they also cannot produce enough coals they are burned to produce power, and their technology is so undeveloped. While they focus on everything into a mass weapon of mass destruction. So these defectors' families of children usually sent to this coal mine, but these coal mines don't have any health and safety. You have to crawl into the cave and dig out the coal with equipment. But often mines are collapsed. Women amputated their arms and legs, or sometimes collapsed, and you don't even know how they were killed. So this was the place I was told to go, and that changed my mind. I love this country, and I gave my everything to the Kim family. I thought they were my God. I worshipped them, but they actually abandoned me to the government, Kim authority itself. So I decided to escape to China, but I had no idea what outside the country of North Korea was look like. It was a great adventure when I first made the decision. The first escape happened with 4 people which escaped together. It's a Tumen River. I mean, if you just drive from Pyongyang to Seoul, it only takes over less than 3 hours. I hope it will happen one day. But we all know it's heavily militarized between South and North Korea, and over 2 million landmines buried between the borders. So most of us, we choose to cross the border to China. And 50-50, you could be killed as well. Or if you're lucky, you are successful to cross the Tumen River to China, which we were lucky. We managed to cross the border to China, arrived safely. And I stood there and was thinking that moment, did I ever able to go back to this my hometown again? It was a strange feeling, and which of course until today I cannot go back to North Korea.
Hi, Timothy. Jim Carouso, New York. Sorry I'm a little bit late, but I'd like to ask you about when you arrived in China, what did you think was going to happen and what did actually happen?
Thank you for having me, James. And so when I arrived in China, the first thing the all of us said, we will walk toward where the light spins around. We saw from miles away the light was shining, spinning around, and we didn't know what exactly that place was. So we walked towards the light where it was shining lights over the far away from it. We probably walked miles, and when we arrived there, it was the market, and a Chinese city market, and I never seen this kind of market in my life. It was in 2004. Still, China was developing stage of the country, which has developed over the past decades now. By now, but the light was spinning on the market, and first time I saw people having different hair colors, different hairstyles, and a lot of young people wearing all kinds of fashions. And I saw many were wearing jeans. Jeans are completely banned in North Korea because it's American productions. And some were wearing jeans with many holes. And I literally standing there, shocked. Delicious food smell on the market, different hair color, hairstyles, all kinds of fashion. And we were brainwashed and taught in North Korea was the best country in the world because it led by the Kim family. But 17-year-old, imagine teenager, and first time seeing that picture of it. And I felt dizzy standing on the market. And I thought that moment, wow, this is not what we were taught. Why didn't I escape earlier? This was my first mind came to me. And of course, China is not safe for North Korean escapees. And until today, we only have 34,000 North Korean escapees managed to get out over the past 3 decades. Most of us were arrested by Chinese authorities and sent back to North Korea, where most of us end up in gulags, tortured, and even executions. And so my journey has to continue to get out China safely. So the first first thing I met someone who tried to help me was someone called Christian missionary came to me. I doubted him, and when I entered his house, the first thing I saw and the Bible on the desk and the cross on the wall, and my legs were shaking, and I thought the cross was a curse, and I genuinely believed even if I touched the cross briefly, my finger would have rotten right away. And I saw a few orphan children in the mission in the house, and I believed they were kidnapped by this missionary. One of the reasons I was thinking that moment and shaking myself because I was brainwashed by anti-religious education in North Korea. North Korea, in this totalitarian society, when you only have two brainwashing educations, the major is that first thing from age 12 months, brainwashing is singing, thinking, act as the Kim, so and let you think, believe Kim is kind of your leader, and therefore you are giving love, loyalty, and worship all the time. The second brainwashing education is anti-religious Christian education, especially. It has written from very early childhood education textbook, cartoon dramas, film, and even musicals, all the way through how Christians did terrible things and against children, women, and all these stories of make you feel like a demon itself. So when I entered this missionary's house, I thought he was going to kidnap me, sell me into human trafficking. And when he even offered me food, I didn't eat it. I definitely thought that he put sleeping pill in the food. So I ran away from his house, running away from God's first provision. And I went to then toward Mongolian border and took few days on the train to get to the Mongolian border. And I met 17 people, and we were 18 of us. We planned to cross the border into Mongolia. Once we crossed into Mongolia, we meant being arrested by Mongolian soldiers. Then they could help us to get to South Korea. As you know the history where when Eastern Germans escaped to West Germany, they automatically became German citizens, which South Korea does have that constitution still today, one Korea policy. But at the Mongolian border, we were all arrested by Chinese soldiers, all 18 of us. And youngest were 4 and 6-year-old in our group. 7 people were whole family. And we were all arrested and sent to a military camp few weeks and transferred to Manchuria city prison. And then eventually we were transferred back to North Korea. And they didn't even use any other transportation than a public bus. On the bus for 4 days, we had to drive from Mongolian border all the way back to the North Korean border area.
So, Timothy, you get sent back to North Korea. How did they treat you when you got back, and how did you manage to escape a second time?
Well, this was the prison cell, and we were all sent to prison, and each of us were split into different prison cells, but each prison cell we were detained were full of people, and in my cell, just it was maximum and capacity. We couldn't even lie down, and I was exhausted after a few days of journey back to North Korea, and so I took a nap, and I was also leaning against the man who was leaning against me, and I woke up early in the morning. I felt my back was getting so heavier. So I was going to tell this guy leaning against me less. But as soon as I turned my head back, his body was falling. He died while he was leaning against my back. and you may have the experience of this, but when someone died, it's the heaviest weight I ever felt in my life. And of course, he was not moving, and it felt like a giant stone was pressing on my back. And we told the prison guard he died. He asked two of us drag him out of the cell, and his body dragged out of the cell through the prison corridor. And I trembled. I thought I was going to be killed like him. I have seen children died of starvation or even man executed in front of my eye. If you ask any North Korean escapees, most of us have experience of watching public execution because we have to watch it. The regime come to force you to watch it. Especially children have to sit at the front of the crowd. But this was a different level of experience being in a prison cell. And every night you could hear it, a man and woman being tortured, screaming and begging. And if any girls or women pregnant from China, these babies are forcibly subjected to abort because they are Chinese babies. But these women were human trafficked or raped during their time in China. But North Korea say you're contaminating Korean blood, therefore all these babies have to be aborted or killed. And I was terribly treated. And in only a few days, I couldn't sit down and I couldn't stand up and I couldn't move. And they decided to send me to my grandmother's house. I still pondering and at this point in my life, because none of them survived, those 17 people who we were arrested. I was the only one survived. But I also often think of this. If I didn't survive there, who would have been able to testify these 17 people's story until today or tomorrow? And when I was sent to my grandmother's house, I couldn't walk. But I knew if when I recovered, I would have asked to come back to the prison because they need the information how I reached, who helped you get to Mongolian border. North Korea often sends a secret agent to assassinate these people, humanitarian workers, or even kidnap them. And previously, even American missionaries were kidnapped and taken to North Korean prison. And thankfully, they all been brought back home. Or Otto Warmbier's case, he was even killed on his arrival. You may remember it. And so I asked my grandmother to help me to escape second time. And this time I couldn't walk on my own. So she found someone who was able to assist me crossing the border. My body had to wrap up with the plastic and I was holding the container on the water. And it took me 2 hours this time. The lady who was helping me next to me, she was keep touching my head and telling me you have to survive because I was drowning into water a couple of times. So second time again, managed to cross the border to China and knocking on a stranger's door there. They could simply report us to the police and get ransom from us, but she didn't. And instead, they offered us with shelter, dry clothes, and food and telephone, which then from there, I was able to move into the city. And a second plan made after treatment went to Shanghai International School. And
So, Timothy, we're gonna start drawing this part one of our interview to a close because we have so much more to ask you. But to sort of wrap us up on this part of the story, take us. So, once you were into the international school, once you got to China, and now you were you had escaped. You were beginning to live maybe something approaching a normal life, how did you then get from there to the UK?
Um, my time in Shanghai, where I was arrested and sent to Shanghai International Prison, and I expected I was just going to send back to North Korea second time. But during the period of this imprisonment, fourth time, we didn't know, but we discovered later that there were international campaign held. How this sparkled then was one of the school students from this Shanghai International School, 13-year-old girl, after they saw we were being arrested by Chinese police, she wrote an email to a journalist, and this journalist moved by her email because she was only 13-year-old. And the journalist encouraged CNN, the Washington Post, the BBC, and international media to join into campaign. So that also then encouraged the U.S. embassy to join the diplomatic negotiation with China and UK and other countries involved in it. Christian human rights groups protested in front of Chinese embassies around the world. And when two men came to me and visited me in the prison, I thought I was going back to North Korea. But outside, I met two diplomats. One guy was a South Korean, the other guy was a Westerner. And they told me, Timothy, we have very surprising news for you, good news, that China made a decision to deport us, 9 of us, we were 9 people, us to the Philippines with diplomatic passports. It never happened, or we were the first and the last ever case happened while we were in Chinese prison. And this was a story because I had the main inmates in my international prison cell, all from different countries. There was one guy even from America. But when I came back to prison cell and shared my story, they were all screaming and cheering for my freedom and said that we should have a party. So I actually had one of the biggest parties in my life in a prison cell. Well, of course, we didn't have other food and all snacks. And we didn't have champagne, but we toasted milk. And so I was leaving the prison cell the day, and all my inmates waved hand at me and told me, have a happy life in a free society. They were the best of my brothers, I could tell. I know they were criminals according to Chinese law. And the best party I ever had there. As there, we were deported to the Philippines, and from Philippines to South Korea, and I was able to go to United Kingdom from there, which I arrived in the UK in 2008, because we were given diplomatic passport. We had the choice to go to any countries we could. This was one of the miracle part of my journey, which I do personally believe in part of miracles in our lives, something that sometimes you cannot explain. But this was the only place also I will kneel to God in a prison cell. I begged to him. It was my own choice. I was forced to worship the Kim family. When I did in a Shanghai prison cell, it was my own choice I had. I knelt to God, asked him, give me freedom. Then I will give all my life to you. So arriving in the UK in 2008, obviously now I'm speaking English. You can imagine I didn't speak any English and no education come from North Korea. I was able to get into my education learning English and high school certificates, college, and I went to university studying politics and got the opportunity to work in Parliament from 2018, become an advocate today.
All right. So we're going to get into that in part 2 because I think we have so much more to talk about. But I think that's a good sort of coda for part 1. And I want to give you a chance before we close to do 2 things. One is I'd like to hear you talk about what is the message on the banner behind you and why is it there and what do you want us to take away? And then 2 is if our listeners are interested in finding out about your work now in advocating for the North Korean people, where should they follow you? So if you can maybe, within about 2 minutes, if you could wrap up on that.
I will do. Thank you, Ray and James. Well, this is a significant banner. It is called the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on North Korea. It is a group in Parliament. I'm the secretariat for this group, mainly member of Parliament, and continue to raise their voice and against North Korea's human rights violations and crimes against humanity. And and here I have written here, the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on North Korea promotes and supports the human rights, freedom, democracy, and security of the 25 million voiceless North Korean people. And I have a map here below, the darkest Korean map. And I'm one of those few who raise voice against North Korea. It is one of also dangerous work. And even at the United Nations Human Rights Council session I spoke last week, North Korean delegation kept lingering around me, tried to discourage me not to speak. And because we speak the experience of life, what we saw, what we went through, it is truth and the story of the truth, and this need to be shared more. So I would be grateful for any of your support who watch this interview. And I have Instagram, obviously, and LinkedIn. If you just search Timothy Cho, my name, and you'd also able to see my work and interviews and publications and my social media as well. And also please encourage your local member of parliament as well as human rights and other charity groups who might be able to continue to promote and raise awareness of these issues. And I also hope U.S. government or maybe the current president, President Trump, he may, I don't know what his plans to make a dialogue with North Korean authorities, but will be continue working on this level of diplomatic engagement. Thank you again for this invitation.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Timothy. And we really look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, Timothy.
And of course, we should mention that our podcast, the reason we can bring you stories like the amazing Timothy Cho's story, is because we have a generous sponsor, Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets. Jim Carouso, of course, is a senior advisor with Bauer Group, and you can visit their website at bauergroupasia.com.
So, Ray, I joined a little late due to, we'll call it, unavoidable circumstances of a bureaucratic nature.
Yeah.
But his story is so incredible and horrifying.
Yes.
Anything particular strike you from that?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that just jumps out at me is he talked about how many, I mean, there are, it seems like there should, you said 34,000, I think was the number, 34,000 escapees. But, that we don't hear 34,000 voices. Most of them must be terrified. I mean, you would think that they would all want to come out and say, hey, this is what happened to me. We have to do something. But, most of them first of all, they probably fear for their own safety. And then they fear for their family's safety that's still back in North Korea. And there's, so just living and growing up in that kind of environment and then knowing how amazingly different it is once you're out, the last thing you want to do is to put that at risk. And so, we should just mention that it's an extraordinarily brave thing to go out and advocate for your people.
It really is. Now, we mentioned to Timothy, we're going to have him back on to talk about what Korea is like now, but also talk about those other 34,000 escapees and, confirm our theory about why they're so silent, but also why a few of them actually go back to North Korea despite it all. What's the motivation there?
I can't imagine. I just can't imagine. I mean, yeah, we'll have to just ask him.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But
go
also,
ahead.
When we hear the story of how horrible it is and how they treat their own people, what is the responsibility of us in the West, free peoples, and our governments in how to engage with North Korea.
Yeah. It is such a hard thing because, and this is, one big reason why the Kim family worked so hard for so many years to develop its own nuclear weapons, is so that it would make that job so much more difficult, right? Now you're holding your own people in a place of in a place of subjugation and fear and repression, and now you're essentially saying to the world, and you guys keep out because we have nukes. And so every discussion now has to start with, we are holding you at risk. So it makes it, and I think that's one of the things that I think we think it's kind of sometimes almost funny when we see Kim Jong-un and his weird haircut, and the jumping crowds and all of those kinds of things, and it just sort of looks ridiculous. And a conversation like this reminds us that there is so much more behind that facade. And and so I guess a part of our responsibility is to do things like this, is to remind people. And by the way, there are efforts like what Timothy is doing and what others do to try to bring some small measure of relief to people that they are able to reach, people in the refugee community, people in the who are trying to be resettled, or advocacy groups. There are opportunities to do something.
There are, but they are limited because the control is so total, because countries neighboring North Korea, like China and Russia, I would argue are complicit in turning it into a giant prison camp.
That's true. Well, I do think that's why, the parts of our, there was actually a little bit of a heartwarming story for you as a diplomat, Jim. There was the story at the end how American and other diplomats intervened to help get Timothy and 8 other people out of China and resettled. So it is important to also remember, as we empower our diplomats, that human rights is easily something that gets put on the back burner when all the other military and geopolitical considerations are being made. And yet you can make a huge difference in a few lives if you are able to break through.
Well, it also showed the power of people power in pressing China to release these people.
Yeah.
And the problem is people's attention span wanes.
Yeah.
And government's attention wanes. And we don't know what's happening to people now.
Well, this has been a very heavy podcast, a very important one, I think. And we want to thank our producer, Ian Ellis Jones, and IEJ Media for helping to put it together and to bring it to our audience. We want to thank our, of course, we remind you that you can follow him at Ian Ellis Jones on X, at Ian Ellis Jones. And of course, we want to thank our generous sponsor, Bauer Group Asia, because they also help us to bring you this content. Of course, we want to remind you that if you're listening to us and you want to see what Timothy looks like and the banner that was behind him, you can see it on YouTube. That's youtube.com @IP Podcast. And you may have found us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, we are on X, and we are on Blue Sky. Finally, don't forget that you can email us at indopacificpodcast@gmail.com. And now that you know that we're going to set up a part 2 with Timothy Cho, if you have specific questions, I think that's the best way to try to get your questions to us. Email us at indopacificpodcast@gmail.com. And so for this time, I want to thank our audience for joining us. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this time. Please join us next time on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific?